Ryan Andrasov. Welcome to Let's Think Digital. For anybody interested in digital government and modernization, the example of Estonia looms large in the imagination. In the most recent United Nations e-government ranking, Estonia ranks second in the world and has been in the top 10 for many years. If you follow the digital government space, you probably know about Estonia for things like their e-residency program, where anyone around the world can access a secure digital identity and access services from the Estonian government, such as setting up a business there. In fact, Estonia is often held up by politicians and senior public servants as an example that Canada should emulate.
Have you ever heard of Estonia? Well, in Estonia 30 years ago was a Soviet republic. So in 30 years, Estonia has gone from a Soviet republic to a digital republic.
And even if you don't follow the digital government space, you've probably still heard of digital products from Estonian companies like Skype, which was once the biggest video conferencing software in the world, well before products like Zoom came on the market. This, despite being a small country of 1.4 million people with an overall economy that by total size is only 101st in the world. So what is it about Estonia that has allowed it to leapfrog into being seen as a digital government powerhouse? That's what the next couple episodes of the podcast are all about. Today, we're going to do the first of a two-part deep dive into the Estonian digital experience by talking to those who have been and are currently on the front lines of Estonia's digital government revolution. I had the opportunity to speak with the Estonian Minister of Justice and Digital Affairs, Liisa-Ly Pakosta. Minister Pakosta was recently appointed into that role in July of this year, and she has an interesting mandate as both the digital government lead for Estonia, as well as leading the justice portfolio. I also spoke to Siim Sikkut, who was the CIO of the Estonian government between 2017 and 2022, and was one of those responsible for the development of Estonia's e-residency program in his prior role as an advisor on digital government to the Estonian Prime Minister. And we also heard from Ville Sirviö, CEO of the Nordic Institute for Interoperability Solutions, the nonprofit that leads the development of one of the core pieces of digital infrastructure in Estonia, the X-Road. So why has Estonia been able to leap over so many other countries with larger economies when it comes to digital? When I met up with Minister Pakosta at the Forward 50 conference in Ottawa back in November, I asked her to share with us a little bit about the journey that Estonia has taken to make digital a priority and how that's evolved over the last few decades.
Okay, I have to go back a little bit more to history because that's important. We had independence, we were occupied by Russia and we had independence war in 1918 to 1920 and we won Russia. So a small state of Estonia won Russia and got its independence 1918. Mm-hmm. So we were an independent state, but then we were again reoccupied by Russia and we regained our independence in 1991. Right. And then we really, after this period of occupation, we were more poor than we were before the Second World War because of the occupation. Right. So starting as an independent state, being very poor, we had to find ways to offer very good services to our citizens in the most effective way. But at the same time, everybody was angry with the corruption that was during the Russian occupation, and we wanted to do everything differently from Russia. So to be a transparent, no corruption state, and that is what we basically have achieved. So the digital state was built on to be fully transparent. That also helped to decline the corruption, and that also helps to build trust.
Yep.
So we were talking beforehand about this transparency about data, but it's not only this transparency. The digital state enables citizens to follow the budget, the expenses of the government, the expenses of the officials. So everything is made transparent. That is very, very important. And most important thing is that we really value freedoms. We really value our freedom as a country. We really value the freedoms of the citizens. And digital state enables us to be free in a democratic state. That's very important, most important for us.
And I think what's also interesting from what I know of the Estonian story on this is, if I can put it this way, there's been a political consensus around the importance of digital. Because I know there's been transitions in government, but it seems, consistently over the last 30 plus years, administrations have been pushing this forward.
Yeah, you are close to be right. There is no total. So the far right is against it. So the far right is trying to build antitrust against government, and sometimes is using also the same bullet points that Russia is using, that governments cannot be trusted. So this antitrust movement is there,
which we see everywhere in the world now.
What we see everywhere, but at the same time, the digital way of offering the services is so good. Everybody feels and sees how good it is for citizens.
Right.
And no politician, it's very hard to go out as a politician and say, we would like to make you worse services. No one does that. So that has held the political constituencies that the services actually are good for people. And see, we were talking about freedoms. So one thing is that you save so much time if the country is not bureaucratic and if it's digitalized, and people value the time. They can use this time with their families, with their hobbies, and it would be really, I think, very hard to turn it the other way around, because then it would be like, you have to take again a week to fill in your tax declaration, which you now can do with less than a minute.
What strikes me about what Minister Pakosta said is how Estonia's focus on digital services was an explicit decision driven in large part by geopolitical necessity and competitive pressures. As a small country next door to a large power, one that fought wars of independence with Russia several times in its history, digital modernization was seen as a way to assert independence after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. It was also seen as an engine for economic growth that would be generational in nature. In fact, when I was learning about the history of Estonia, it was really interesting to see how one of those choices was to embed information technology into the educational system to serve as a social development tool, inspiring a whole new generation through what was called the Tiger Leap program. Siim Sikkut was one of those kids, well before becoming CIO of Estonia, and he told me about how those educational experiences early in his life influenced his own journey, including leading the development of Estonia's groundbreaking e-residency program.
I always like to sort of say that the digital journey of Estonia has sort of generations, if you wish, so or phases, and perhaps now it's like a fourth or the fifth phase of that. So in early days, first of all, obviously it's like initiation time. You're just starting. That's late 90s, early 2000s when a lot of the foundations were built. First services digitized, e-cabinets came for ministers to have meetings aided by digital tools. X-Road for data exchange emerged, national digital identity registers. Laws, that whole thing. That was the time basically when Estonia had a burning platform in terms of really. We always have had, because we're so small, so we need to be very efficient, effective as a government to be a fully fledged government. And from that, it was a time also of economic crisis. So there was a savings and cuts program. So any ideas were welcome to really optimize and make the government more efficient, back end and front end, and raise more taxes. And that was the time when digital was going mainstream. That's the first .com bubble, if you remember. So some of you remember. So
this would have been like late 1990s, early 2000s.
Exactly, right. And so that was experimentation and initiation time. It worked. And the second phase was really then taking digital everywhere, sort of, right? So in that sense, trying to really have all sectors become digital, all services frontline become digital. It was like a I don't want to say arms race, but still like a race between ministries and departments on that. What happened was that everybody ended up in very diverse sort of quality of services, and the experience differed, and like even technologically the maturity differed a lot. So then from, let's say, 2012-13 onwards, a new government came in with a plan to try to sort of, restart a bit of that, make the governance a bit more hybrid. So there's like more top-down steering. Government CIO position was laid. Prime Minister got new advisors in, and so from that we started like a redesign effort, that rebuilding a lot of the services for the first time, really with user centricity in mind, for example. And from that, I would argue that from around end of 2020s, 2010s, so let's say 2018, 19 onwards, that was a time when we tried to basically like reboot like the next wave of innovation in many ways. We started playing with AI. We started basically playing with, let's say, life journeys as a new level of experience. We at the same time we were playing a catch-up game to really fortify the foundations in cybersecurity, going to cloud, all of that. So I think that's still ongoing. That sort of, let's say, rejuvenation, or let's say new innovation sort of game, hopefully. And my own story is very much aligned. So I was still in high school when the whole journey started. But I'm also a child of what we call a Tiger Leap program. Tiger Leap was a program to bring internet and computers to all the schools. So every school in the country got a computer class. So kids like me got exposed to that earlier. I moved away, studied abroad. I started my career in government, really on the side of economic policy and then financial planning of things. But having had this technology exposure early and working on economic development, my sort of hunch was that if Estonia has one shot in this big bad world, it's anything digital. So I grew a bit into the digital policy side, really with the aim to focus on what is our strength. And so when the government came in 2012 or 13 trying to restart the momentum, then I had a chance of becoming advisor to the prime ministers in the government office on all things digital. So I was part of that rejuvenation effort. And then later I was able to then move on to be the government CIO and try to start this innovation, the fourth wave of things, right? So intertwined a bit with the story, but not there in the early days, really.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I want to come back to talk a little bit about your time as CIO and some of what happened there. But I did actually want to ask a little bit about those earlier days as well, and even when you were working with the Prime Minister as an advisor. One of the things we talk a lot about is the fact that when we're looking at digital modernization, technology is part of it, but it's really about this bigger culture change in terms of how our organizations work and the mindsets behind it. And I'm wondering if that was true in Estonia as well, is if that's part of the Estonian story. To what degree did the actual bureaucracy have to evolve itself? Or were people kind of already conditioned to be thinking about working in a different type of way?
Well, there's a lot in there, and well, first of all, let me just share how I think about culture myself, right? So I really think about the culture is like the sum of our practices. So culture is basically like what we see based on what we do, sort of, or what you see based on how we do things. So if you talk about culture in that sense, I don't believe that you can raise culture by an educational program or propaganda, for example. You just have to start doing things different, and obviously you can train people to do stuff different and support that. But the incentives, everything, the leadership, the governance mechanisms, they have to align to enable this different kind of practice. Then the culture can be created. So in Estonian case, there's also two things. First of all, obviously there's a sort of culture, meaning like a set of practices how to get stuff done. Again, as perhaps a small country, we've always had this urge of getting stuff done because you're not getting anywhere otherwise. And I think that has also helped the digital transformation sense, right? Because you're focused on how to solve things in a way. Secondly, we did take conscious steps also to bring more of that digital transformation practices in. For example, how do tech companies or startups work? How do you do agile or iterative development? Or, as opposed to fixing all problems at once, like governments want to do with reform packages, you start really from minimum viable solution first, for example. So more and more these took roots as well through when, like I said, after we started restarting the practices here. So in a complicated way, I'm trying to say that there's been efforts to really build a different kind of practice. This has taken some root, but even if I go around, well, the thing is that people change, as we all know, right? So it's like a never-ending effort you got to take, because not everybody comes in with this sort of ready-made culture, ready to go. You constantly have to incentivize, educate, work with them so they could actually do a good job in a sort of proper sort of way, and to get transformation done. So we still see that entities or let's say ministries are at different levels of that maturity, and if people move, then they can go even back sometimes. So it's like I said, it's a never-ending effort, and no country is fully ever done in that sense.
Do you think that the size matters? The fact that Estonia is a relatively small country, and I assume, the civil service is relatively small, does that make it easier to be able to make that kind of change internally?
Well, to some degree, for sure. Look, because, to get any decisions done, there's less people to convince. It's a numbers game a bit in that sense, right?
And less people to say no on the other side.
Well, that's what I mean. Less people to convince, right? So whether on a political level or among your peers in administration level or whatever. But at the same time, if you're tiniest of countries, you also have, a talent barrier, right? You have a talent, harsh conditions that you will just basically have to work with the people you do. In Estonia, it's the same thing. We've had to work with the people we have in that sense. I always envy countries that are bigger than us in that sense. So my point being that it's not like for granted. So being small itself doesn't give you that edge. It can help potentially to make decision making especially fast, and you need to make a lot of bold decisions if you want to transform. But it's only an enabling or helping factor, not a guaranteed done deal.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that, and I think that's helpful perspective in terms of how that cuts on both ways. Well, and speaking of making bold decisions or taking kind of unique approaches, one of the things I wanted to ask you about was the e-residency program,
right?
Because I know this was something that you were involved with during that time when you were an advisor to the Prime Minister, and I think this was 10 years ago now that Estonia launched its e-residency program. I'm wondering, for people who aren't familiar with it, can you explain a little bit about what that is and what the innovation was behind it?
Well, we happen to be recording this on the 2nd of December, right? It comes out a bit later, but actually it's 10 years ago yesterday that we launched it.
Wow.
So it's literally like a birthday time. E-residency, in a nutshell, look, it's basically we, Estonian government, I can't say we anymore, the Estonian government, gives a digital key to anybody in the world who wants to basically do cross-border business, for example, without any middleman and so forth. So let's say you, Ryan, you could apply to get Estonian digital identity. That's the digital identity that the government issues. And that's your key to then services online that the government or the private sector partners provide, like banks or notaries or whatever. And the primary target group indeed is entrepreneurs, because for them it's especially that doing cross-border business is still quite a hassle, especially if you want to be for example, a professional freelancer. You could reside anywhere, and your clients can be global, but to then work with them, get the invoices paid, whatever like that, is a hassle. So having good services for that and a good business environment. For example, that you can run your company from a distance, and it's everything easy, like it is for Estonians otherwise. That's the sort of idea. So we give you a key to have hassle-free, basically management of your companies, for example. And the services for that, I still say, are government and private sector provided. So the government, for example, handles company management or registrations and taxes and stuff like that. everything else beyond, from accounting to banking, or let's say payments to whatever, is then private sector sphere on top of it. So it's like a platform to enable private digital services offering as well. And why it matters is that, first of all, it reduces the friction of getting things done in business life. We have about 120,000 e-residents through time.
Wow.
They've come really, like I said, because they've been freelancers, wanted to roam the world, but still you need the jurisdictional anchor. Or they come because at their home countries, I'm sorry to say, it's so hard to start business. Or they need to be trusted in cross-border business. Like, we had a lot of Ukrainians, even before this awful war, come in and set up a company through Estonia, and then they did like e-commerce or coding and whatever to clients abroad. Many different use cases, but the whole idea, you have a very easy to use, safe business environment and access to the services with a digital key. That's e-residency.
Another really interesting thing about digital services in Estonia is what connects it all together behind the scenes. When you look at the suite of digital services available in Estonia, whether it's e-residency, automatic filing of taxes, online voting, or e-health records, there's a high degree of interoperability and data sharing between those services that you just don't see in a lot of other jurisdictions. What makes this all work is a piece of technology called X-Road. Anyone who's heard about Estonia's digital government accomplishments has no doubt heard about X-Road in the same breath. So what is X-Road? I'll let Ville Sirviö, CEO of the Nordic Institute for Interoperability Solutions that develops and governs the platform, tell us all about it.
So X-Road is a centrally managed distributed data exchange solution, which provides you with the software that enables you to set up a national data ecosystem, which can involve all of the society, including the private sector, the public sector. Usually it's a data ecosystem facilitated by public administration, but it's essential to have also the private sector as part of the ecosystem to get the full benefits of X-Road. So a solution for building a data ecosystem for easy and effective data sharing securely.
Right, and I understand security is a big part of it, right? It's kind of ensuring the security of that data, and that that the system, from my understanding, is it's never really been compromised, right? It's been able to withstand a lot of cyber attacks over the years.
As far as I know, it has never been compromised as a system. So, of course, there might be some independent information systems part of the ecosystem, which could be target to some attacks, but to say it would be compromised or anything really be put down, I don't think that's ever happened with X-Road.
Right.
So it has been up and running since 2001, and I guess it has been really tested in practice.
Because it is, I've seen some diagrams before of kind of the infrastructure of X-Road, and so my understanding is, as you mentioned, you have public sector and private sector who can all be together to share data. So you could use your digital identity for doing your banking, or you could use it to vote in elections. But if I understand right, each of those different databases essentially cryptographically is kind of secure in its own piece, so that even if one part of it were to get breached in a way, it doesn't get access to the entire system.
Well, X-Road is distributed, so it means that every organization sets up its own access point component, which is technically speaking a security server in X-Road. And through the security server, they can access technically all of the other services in the ecosystem, but this technical access does not provide any access to data yet.
Right.
So the data exchange parties always agree upon the data exchange between each other, and the data exchange also takes place between the two security servers of those organizations. So there is no central component as a kind of single point of failure or anything like that, which would be in a risk. It has central components for managing the ecosystem, but data never flows through the central components, and that's what makes X-Road secure.
Okay. And when people hear about distributed systems, these days people talk a lot about distributed ledgers and blockchain. Now, does X-Road use blockchain, or is it a different type of technology for distributed systems?
It doesn't use blockchain, and I wouldn't call it a distributed ledger either. And we actually have 2 blog posts already from 2018 in which these myths are busted.
Okay.
So, because it has commonly popped up in the news that X-Road would be a blockchain solution, but it's not. So.
Right, and I've heard this before too, and I didn't think that it was.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll find those blog posts and put them in the notes for the show so people can take a look at that if they're interested. Okay, so myth bust, no blockchain as part of X-Road, but it is still a distributed system, but not a distributed ledger.
Yeah, just a distributed system. And what is most important to understand about X-Road is that it's not a data exchange or data sharing solution only, but the main idea is to form an ecosystem. So that's the real goal, that you actually have a large ecosystem of different participants who can continuously benefit of being already connected and to utilize, produce and consume different services within the ecosystem.
Right. And so your institute, as you said, is a non-profit organization.
Yes.
So you've got a non-profit model, and you're sharing X-Road essentially with different governments around the world. A couple of questions about kind of how this model works, which I find fascinating. So do you do actual implementation with them? Will you, if a country came to you and said, we want to implement X-Road within our systems, do you provide the technical advice and assistance to them to be able to do that?
We don't actually do that. So we are just a software development organization.
Right.
So we develop the X-Road core. And the countries that have implemented or will implement X-Road, they usually do it by themselves. And they might find some help from so-called X-Road technology partners. So we have a program for companies that have experience in X-Road.
Okay.
And it's really useful for any government willing to explore X-Road or to implement it, that you already have existing resources. Besides that, we have released lots of materials for anyone interested in X-Road. Like we have a free online academy for learning the fundamentals of X-Road, and then specific courses for server administrators and different roles involved in the maintenance and implementations of the ecosystem model. So we are never part of the implementations, but we just release the software as open source. It's fully free, no license fees. Anyone can just take it and implement it. Also free for Canada and any of the states here. So we are really looking forward to that.
As much as we often associate digital with technology, the truth is that these things are never just about the technology. They require political will and navigating bureaucratic systems. And as we've talked about before on this podcast, building and sustaining political momentum is one of the hardest and most important ingredients to digital modernization of government. I've seen this firsthand from my time working in the Canadian government and in my work now engaging with leaders at all levels of government. So how did the people working in Estonia get through these political and bureaucratic blockers to get initiatives like e-residency off the drawing board and actually implemented? I wonder, when you were going through the process of setting up the e-residency program, was that a difficult process to get approval from? I imagine there must have been some legislative involvement to change some of the laws around it, or again, is this something where the size of Estonia benefited the ability to move quickly on something like this?
Well, I guess to our taste, it's been even, let's say, very slow 10 years. We would have thought we would be even further than that in some ways. But obviously things like COVID and have intervened in the years. But, well, first of all, you're right about digital diplomacy side of things. I mean, there was always like a nice side effect that, suddenly you get this recognition, like even like country recognition more. You had more friends in the world, etc. But we still want to say that the main target was to make the economy bigger. And so to really have more business going through our country and bringing business to this country as well. And that has really what has happened. And, which means, more like the return on investment for government is basically taxes. So the return on investment every year is about 5 to 7 times, I think, through the history. So it's like revenue generating from government point of view. But beyond that, was really the idea was the other thing that, let's start small and figure this out. So it was very much like an experimentation, how we also approached politically. So if you asked about resistance or, how easy it was to get it done, well, they had quite a bit of pushback initially, and that's natural because there was risks involved. Like, how do we make sure that, money launderers are not coming to abuse this sort of opportunity now? So we had to build proper safeguards in, and that took a bit of time. But fundamentally, on a political level and leadership level as well, we got support saying, let's try this out. I think this has been very instrumental throughout different points of Estonian time history, like X-Road originally, or online voting for parliament. There's been moments where politicians have said, okay, so there might be risks involved. There definitely, we don't know if it's going to work, but let's try to figure this out. So they enable this experimentation, really. And when you experiment, then you can, fail a bit, fail fast ideally, as they say, right? you iterate, you correct, you improve. So we built the residency with this startup approach in mind, consciously, in terms of what was the method of development and how did we expand the offering. And we didn't want to have a perfect thing from the start, because that was not going to be possible. We had to literally get to the market and then see what works.
Yep.
And that thinking was alien to the government. In governments, for political reasons, you try to cover all butts. So you try to figure out all the risks. You're gonna have, everything has to be foolproof. How come it's not ready when you launch? Well, that's how startups do it. So we were able to bring this in, and that took quite a bit of fight and also bureaucratic hacking to build a team that was sheltered like that could work in a different way, and then also to make other departments all the way to police board or somebody who's very conservative for good reasons, to then adjust and work with that sort of mode of working. So that's been the cool part of it. Has been contributing to the success, and that's what I think now we've been able to emulate in next areas quite a bit to like you said, that's the sort of culture or the practices we have then been able to use more.
Right. And is it fair to say that now those practices, that culture has become fairly common across the Estonian government?
Well, as I said before, it still is uneven, because I still say people change, right? So even, let's say, in e-residency, there's the fourth or third generation working, and not even, let's say, in the core team of that, but people around that. So it's you constantly have to work on that, because the incentive, let's say, the natural instinct of governments is not to be, for example, agile or iterative, or yes. Your budgeting works against that, your risk management works against that. So the machinery of government needs to constantly be tinkered or improved to really make it a status quo in there.
Yeah. No, absolutely, and I think you're bringing up this important part, which is it's human beings at the end of the day, right, who are behind this, and kind of recognizing that they have to come along on that journey becomes an important part of it. It's something we've talked about a lot on the podcast, I think, in recent months. Speaking of the human journey, I'm kind of thinking about your journey as well. And so, you spent this period of time as an advisor to the Prime Minister. And then, as you mentioned, in 2017, you became CIO for the Estonian government, and you held that position for about 5 years. I'm curious, in your time as CIO, is there anything that really stands out to you as projects or initiatives that you're most proud of, that you were able to shepherd through the system?
Well, I'm proud of a few things. I also think that I'm proud of a few things we failed at in a good way, because these were good failures in a way. Yep. But I think if I try to look back in a sort of reminiscent way, but we were able to get some next wave things going, which was the intent, and they still, there's still major programs even in the government currently, 2 years later when I have left in a way. The first thing is that we very clearly made a strong effort to fix the foundations. So in Estonian case, the legacy had been building up. There was not enough investment being done into constant iteration of systems and things. We were able to fix quite a bit of patches on that. We worked on how to change governance and financing mechanisms for that, etc. So we started. There's still lots to be done on that to really secure, because you have to constantly secure what you built and then add new things on top, not just the last one. But that was the part. And to me, coming also into the government CIO role, having worked in tandem with my predecessor, I had sort of this idea, obviously, what the role is about. But the amount of effort that we really had to put in to all this sort of existing stack and services and technology, and really fortifying that was still a surprise. And so I think to anyone out there, because almost no government starts from scratch today, even if you go in with an innovation agenda, sort of want to do the next cool things, that's what you got to be ready for. Just the daily unsexy stuff of making the foundations better all the time, because that carries you longer.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that'll probably be of comfort to some people listening to this, because I know certainly here in Canada or most countries around the world, people spend a lot of their time dealing with legacy systems, kind of worried about that. And, I think there probably might be this misconception to say, well, you've got in Estonia, which is a relatively new country, didn't have a lot of, was able to start fresh in some ways, 20, 30 years ago. But the fact that you still had to deal with a lot of technical legacy probably makes people feel better that that's just a little bit of just part of the reality of modern life, right? Any kind of large organization is going to have some kind of technical debt they have to deal with.
And look, I mean, I would even de-emphasize the technical debt. It's the debt of organization and a procedure, right? Like how we do things and that sort of stuff, right? So even if you transform something, I don't know, at some point, let's say 99, you move to online tax or whatever, right? And so that gets stuck, that immediately becomes a legacy because that's not now how you do things. You want to change that, you need to break that. So that sort of tendencies, everything is immediately legacy once introduced, basically. The other things but on that note, a few things that we were able to start was clearly a strong artificial intelligence effort. Look, 2018, 19 onwards, when we defined, what is our national strategy on that, and then the approach was to say, hey, let's really get experimentation in public sector going. Like even before we even regulate, we have to understand what we're dealing with, and then we had this hunch that, again, given the size, because of the biggest, value of AI is productivity. It should be like a natural fit to Estonia. And so we were able to get dozens and dozens of experiments going. Many of them actually became live applications later. All the way to what is the hashtag bureaucratic. That's an Estonian program of now that's still ongoing, that how to make virtual assistant, AI-based virtual assistant as the interface to the government, all services and all information of government. So think about you get everything from a Siri in your phone, for example. Anything you need to get done with the government. So that was a major move. In parallel, we started to move to really redesign a lot of services around life journeys, end-to-end around them. So your kid is born, it should be one interaction, not 3 or 5 online, even if they're good ones. So beyond that, we started an architectural change, moving more to microservices to enable all of this, to be able to basically build those sort of life journeys together like Lego pieces, etc., etc. So there's that sort of stuff we got going, and I still say that I'm proud that it still goes. In some ways, it has taken longer, perhaps, because again, people have changed afterwards, but the government is still on them.
Yeah. But you're feeling fairly confident some of those foundations are in place now that can be built on top of.
Well, they always have to be improved. I mean, so the fact that, again, you have something, as I said, it becomes a legacy. So we spoke about X-Road for a bit. I mean, and perhaps for anyone who hasn't still heard about X-Road, then it's not really perhaps a platform that everything runs on. It's a data exchange mechanism to really exchange data then, for whatever services out there. So it's like a specific digital public infrastructure piece in a way, or layer. Now, X-Road is currently, the version 8 of that is being built. So my point being that even if you had something, in fact, your needs, your requirements, your government changes, you need to upgrade also your foundations all the time. Otherwise you get stuck. So this is my example that, this is the same everywhere, right? So, and in some ways we also got stuck in a few places, like cloud transition was quite painstaking because systems were not ready for that, and still ongoing, for example. So that was the idea, that we had to change the notion that even if you have the foundations need constant improvement work. And I think that's what I'm a bit proud of, that we managed to get that across.
The foundations need constant improvement. That statement absolutely rings true to me. Fixing the plumbing, as we've talked about before on this podcast, which goes much beyond the technical debt that people often talk about. It's equally about shifting the culture within government, including modernizing the structures and incentives of our public sector organizations. Updating our laws and policies, rethinking the role of public servants in the digital age, and building trust with citizens to help give government the license it needs to make these big changes. It's really validating to see then that as we dive deeper into Estonia's journey, we learn that their approach to digital government hasn't just been focused on the technical. It's also about tackling the legal frameworks to be enablers for modernization. This is especially true today with artificial intelligence pushing against the outdated policies and ways of working in many governments around the world and forcing us to start rethinking some of our assumptions. So let's go back to Minister Pakosta to talk about this dynamic, who has a unique perspective on these issues, given her very interesting ministerial portfolio that combines both justice and digital affairs.
Yes, we made a change in Estonia this summer, and we put together the classical Ministry of Justice, and then we had Ministry of Economics and Digital Affairs, but we took the Digital Affairs and put it together with Justice. So now we have a Ministry of Justice and Digital Affairs. The reason behind this, the change, was that basically very much of the digital state or the digital services is now based on legal issues. So when we want to go on with using AI, for example, we have to solve a lot of legal issues to protect basic rights and basic values that we have in our society. So, for example, the European Union AI Act, we see it as it enables us to offer even more, even better services, even more personalized services. But to do this, we need new laws, we need new norms, and for this to be made in an innovative way. So the best solution was to put the digital side and the legal side together to help the innovation to go on in the way that really all the basic rights and values are protected.
I think it's a fascinating approach and philosophy because, traditionally when governments created digital ministries, they tended to be linked to either economic development or in some cases service delivery or policy organizations within the government. And I think you're right. Like one of the big challenges we have is how do we actually update the laws and the structures of the state? And I assume Estonia is probably one of the first places in the world to actually combine digital with justice into one portfolio.
One of the first, not the only one at the same time, but again, I fully understand it was a good decision from the beginning to have it connected with the economy side, but because most of the innovation comes from private companies, so it's fully understandable. But nowadays, especially with artificial intelligence, so the technology is so advanced. So to go on with public services, better public services for our citizens, we need to have changes also legally.
Yes.
Or we have to see how to safeguard the basic rights, the data rights. So, but at the same time, while securing the data rights and other basic rights, we have to ensure that there is room for innovation, and that is why we put these two things together.
I think that's one of the real challenges around digital in a lot of jurisdictions is, preserving data and ensuring that we can kind of ensure privacy and keep trust while still having that room for innovation. And I know, you just came off of the keynote address you gave here at Forward 50 at the conference that we're attending, and trust was a really big theme for you. And if I kind of understood your message, it's that trust is an essential ingredient to having a digital state.
Absolutely. Trust is on what the whole digital state is built on. You can't have digital state without trust. People have to trust, and you have to design a system that can be really trusted to every detail. So that's fundamental. And again, talking about the legal side of this, it also has to build trust. We want to be different from China. That's absolutely clear. We are a democratic country. We want to be, and we are on the top of democratic countries. So it means that our laws, our justice system, everything has to ensure that people can trust the digital services, the digital state. To build trust, there are different possibilities. For example, in Estonia, we use the possibility that everybody who has given data to state, for example, medical data to your family doctor, or your children's data to a registry or whatever. So you can check very easily who has taken a look on your data. There is a very easy interface where you can go in and you actually see that this person at this time took a look on my, for example, car data in my car registry. And if that person did not have a legitimate interest for that, so this person gets punished. So everything is built up in the way that you can check every single move that is done with your data.
Wow. And I think that's one of the remarkable things around the digital infrastructure that Estonia has built. Because here, certainly in Canada, and I think in a lot of, North American, Western countries, we don't have that ability, right? It feels like it's a bit of this black hole that your data goes into. And certainly, if you wanted to request as a Canadian getting access to your data, it's paper forms, it's, paper you're going to get back, takes multiple months. That idea of having a live dashboard that you can go into and in real time see your data, it really does kind of move that data privacy question, kind of flips it around, right? And essentially saying, let's put the burden back on the state to show that it's responsible using your data and do it in a very transparent type of way.
I fully agree with what you said, and I would like to underline that if you have a paper file, you actually don't know who looked at your paper file and who looked at your data.
Yep.
It can even be medical data. You don't know which people took a look on this paper file. The difference with the digital one is that you can be absolutely sure that you know every single person who looked on your data. We have had cases in hospitals, for example, where there has been a patient and there has been a friend of the patient working as a doctor. Maybe even the patient asked this friend to look at the data and give a second advice or something like that, but this is not allowed. So the doctor who did so had absolutely good intention, but no legal grounds to do this, and the doctor lost the job because it was not allowed to look on the data. So only the doctor who is responsible, or of course you can get a second opinion in Estonia as well, free of charge. So the second doctor has this right, but not your friends, even not your relatives. Do not, if they work as officials or if they technically might have the possibility to look at your data, they are not allowed.
I want to maybe, as we kind of come to the end of our conversation, look a little bit forward. And, we talked a bit about the history of the last few decades of Estonia's journey. I'm wondering in the years ahead, what are you looking forward to, or what do you think are kind of the next most important milestones for Estonia as it continues its digital journey?
Of course, I have to again underline cybersecurity because as a pity, also the evil side is developing. So this remains as the top issue to ensure that we are before the evil ones. So, but to go to the services, as all the services already are digitalized or digital, then the next step is to personalize the services using the data and again making it in this way that citizens are real winners, that they get even more services that are personalized, that match their needs, and that the services come to people in an even more smooth way, so that you don't have to apply to anything, basically. So that's the road we are looking for.
I've heard one of your former colleagues, Siim Sikkut, former CIO from Estonia, talk about this idea that the best service interaction is no service interaction at all.
Yeah, absolutely. So the best government is the government you don't notice at all.
Absolutely. And do you at the beginning of our conversation, we talked a little bit about artificial intelligence. Do you think AI is going to be part of that? I mean, do you envision a future where AI essentially plays that intermediary role between government and citizens?
We adapted new guidelines for Estonian government in spring and for AI. And that includes that we want to become the government in the world that uses most of the AI. So we see it as an enabler.
Minister, we're really happy you had a chance to come visit Canada and be able to spend some time here in Ottawa. I'm going to give the final word to you. Any kind of closing thoughts, as, a lot of our listening audience is coming from Canada. We're thinking about how to modernize our digital government approach in this country. Any kind of final lessons or advice that you would give for our listeners here as to what they should take away from the Estonian experience and try to apply here in Canada?
If that's government side, I think you should start from the basic architecture, that you have the interoperability system like the X-Road we have in Estonia, and that is scalable to Canada. So you need this first. If you are a citizen, so I think it's good for your tax percentage that you support the digital developments, because then you have to pay less taxes.
That's always a strong selling point.
And you get better services, and you get better services at the same time.
I mean, that is the dream: lower taxes and better services.
Yeah, and of course, I invite everybody to visit also physically Estonia.
I had a chance to go in 2016. It was a beautiful country. I look forward to coming back sometime.
Thank you so much for your good words.
Well, and thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate having you on the podcast. I hope you enjoyed the first part of our deep dive into the Estonian digital story. And a big thanks again to Minister Pakosta, Siim, and Ville for sharing their experiences. They actually shared a lot more in their interviews than we could put into this episode, with so many insights that may be of interest to you. So if you want to go even further into the Estonian digital journey and see what else they had to say, please check out our Let's Think Digital YouTube channel, where we've posted the full uncut interviews with all three of them. As I mentioned, this is the first of 2 episodes on the Estonian digital journey. Next episode, we're talking to Andres Reisti, Senior Vice President, Public Sector at the Estonian-based company Nortal. That conversation centered around the importance of trust as a key ingredient to modernize government. I think it's clear that we're in a particular moment in time right now where you see around the world decreasing levels of trust in government, skepticism and the fear of big technology companies, and fears about hacking and the theft of personal information. Andres has done a lot of work recently looking at how trust is having an impact on digital transformation efforts around the world. Make sure to subscribe to this podcast to be notified as soon as that episode drops. And that's the show for this week. We always love hearing from our listeners, so get in touch by emailing us at podcast@thinkdigital.ca, visiting letsthinkdigital.ca, or using the hashtag #Let'sThinkDigital on social media. We'd love to hear from you. Today's episode of Let's Think Digital was produced by myself, Wayne Chu, and Aislinn Bournay. Thanks so much for listening, and let's keep thinking digital.